Project 160 is the first of several projects that involve this circuit and the game Six-Sided Dice Game. In this version of the game, you need 2 players, and each player will take an opportunity to roll the dice by holding down the C button. We will select Game 5, and then a player would hold down the dice, the C button, and see what numbers they roll. Now, what confuses me is that they say you have to roll a 0 first, but a dice does not have the number 0, so it's impossible to roll 1. And so this game will not allow you to roll 0 either. And so we will go right over to 1, and I think if there is a 1 in the number that they roll, whether it's in the ones digit or in the tens digit, that player will be able to cross the 1 off of the number line, and then they can go on to the next number, which is a 2. Now, if a player gets 2 consecutive numbers, for instance 1 and 2, then they will be able to cross off both those numbers. Now, it's also confusing because I'm not sure if the number you roll normally has to be in the ones digit or if it can be in the tens digit as well. For example, if you already rolled a 4, you already got a 4, you can let that 5 in the tens digit count, and you don't have to roll again. The objective, though, is to be able to cross off all these numbers from 1 going up to 6, and then repeating 6 before decreasing back down to 0, or in this case, I am going to do 1. Whoever gets all their numbers first will win the game. Project 161 is Six-Sided Dice Game Difference Maker. For this game, you can have 2 or more players, and each of the players will start with 500 points. I'm going to select Game 5 right now. The players will take turns in a clockwise fashion, sitting in a circle, and they would hold down the C button for a period of time. Maybe it's good to set a fixed time limit on which you need to hold down the C button, like 3 seconds. Now, in this case, I rolled 24 points. So each player compares their roll to that of the previous player. If the current player's roll is higher than the previous player's roll, then the current player will take away points from the previous player based on the difference between their rolls. If the current player's roll is lower than the previous player's roll, then the current player will give points to the previous player based on the difference between their rolls. So, for instance, if player 1 rolled 35 and then the player 2 rolled a 50, player 2 will take away 15 points from player 1. And the objective of this game is to be the last person in the game to have points. The first player to run out of points in the game will be out. Like if I rolled, let's pretend we all had 500 points. I rolled 13 on player 1, and then the next player rolled 43 points. The difference between those two numbers is 30, and I will lose 30 points. Therefore, I have 470 points, but the other player who went after me will have 530 points. And that is how you play Difference Maker. Project 162 is Six-Sided Dice Game Don't Go Low. We're using Game 5, obviously, but this game is for 2 or more players, and each player has 5 lives. Players would take turns in a clockwise fashion, and each player can decide whether they want to keep the first roll or roll the dice again. If they decide to roll again, then they have to stay with the number from their second roll. They can't pick the previous number that they got. After each of the players have rolled, the player with the lowest score loses a life. The last player with lives will be the winner. So let's pretend there's 3 players here, and they're going to roll the dice. The first player gets 16 points. I'm just going to pretend that each player stays with the first roll. The second player got 35. And the third player got 63. So the first player is going to lose a life. And then once a player loses all their lives, then they are going to be out of the game. Project 163, 6-sided dice game, gets more involved. Free the Frogs will be more involved. This game is for 2 or more players, and each player pretends that they have 6 frog cages labeled 1 through 6, as well as 6 frogs. Before play, each player can decide where to place the frogs. Now, probably for this game, one has to have a piece of paper and draw the cages and then pretend to put frogs in them. They can put one frog in each of the 6 cages, or they could put all their frogs in one cage, or anything in between. And the example's right there. 3 frogs in cage 1, 2 frogs in cage 1, 3 frogs in cage 4, and 1 frog in cage 6. And then players will go clockwise, sitting in a circle, and take turns. And then if a player has a frog in the cage labeled by one of the numbers rolled, then they can release a frog from that cage. For instance, if a player rolled 36, they can release 1 frog from cage 3 and 1 frog from cage 6 if they have frogs in either of those cages. If they roll doubles, then they can remove 2 frogs from the cage of that number. If they have at least 2 frogs in it, they can remove 2 frogs. The first player who releases all their frogs wins. I'm going to pretend that I have 1 frog in each cage. And I am going to roll the dice. And I got 26, so that means I can free the frog that is in cage 2 and the frog that is in cage 6. Now I can free the frog in cage 1 and the frog in cage 3. And then we'd be taking turns. Now I can free the frog in cage 5, and then I have 1 more frog left, which is in cage 4. I'm just speeding up the gameplay so that I can move on to the next project. But now I can free the frog in cage 4, and all my frogs are free now. Project 164 is called Free the Fish. This project is very similar to the previous one, Free the Frogs, and we pretend that we have fish bowls instead of cages, and fish will be in them. And players can select wherever the combination in which they put their fish in the bowls. However, a difference in this game is that the player will compute the difference between the 2 numbers rolled by the dice, and then they can take 1 fish out of the bowl labeled with the difference of the 2 dice. For instance, if a player rolled 36, the difference of those 2 numbers, 3 and 6, is 3. And so the player can release 1 fish from bowl 3 if they have fish in that bowl. The first player to release all their fish wins. I'm just going to do this once to demonstrate, once or twice. Now 6 minus 6 is 0, so that wouldn't count because there are no bowls labeled 0. But in this case, 6 minus 5 is 1, and that means I can release any fish I have in bowl 1. 4 minus 1 is 3, so that means I can release any fish that are in bowl 3. And you may now have a better idea with how these games work. Project 165 is six-sided dice game, Free the Foxes. For this game, we will need 2 or more players, and we're going to pretend that we're using foxes instead of frogs or fish. This game is similar to the previous 2, but each player will have 11 barns, which are labeled 2 through 12, as well as 11 foxes. Before the game, each player will decide where to put the foxes. They could put 1 fox in each of the barns, they can put them all in one barn, or they could do any combination, like the example that I am showing you. 2 foxes in barn 3, 5 foxes in barn 8, and 4 foxes in barn 11. Once all the players have put their foxes where they want them, they should sit in a circle and take turns in a clockwise fashion, rolling the electronic dice. Now, the barn in which players will be able to take foxes from will be determined by the sum of the numbers they roll. For instance, I rolled a 16, and that is a 1 and so there are a 1 and a 6. Adding those numbers will give you 7, and therefore you can take whatever one barn from number 7. From barn 7. You can only take 1 fox at a time. If you were to roll another total of 7, like 6 and 1, then you would be able to take an additional fox out of barn 7 if you had one. 1 and 3. Now, you could take a fox out of barn 4 if you have it. The first player who releases all their foxes is the winner. After playing all these games for a while, you could see strategies in where best to put the animals across the 3 different games. This is something that you could add in the comments for these 3 projects. You can say where it is best to put your animals in these 3 projects. And they have their own advantages in the games. Project 166 is extremely complicated to me, and therefore I'm just going to read the instructions, and I am not going to tell you how I would play because I don't fully understand them, but you may. And so I will read the instructions, and I'll ask you to listen carefully. We will use Game 5, of course, and this game is for 2 or more players. They will roll the dice in the same fashion as the previous games, in a clockwise fashion, and after rolling the dice, you would take the difference between the 2 numbers. In the grid below, the player can shade in a line adjacent to the difference between the 2 dice. For instance, if a player rolled 36, then 6 minus 3 equals 3, so that player can shade in one of the dotted lines above, below, to the left, or to the right of the number 3 in the grid below. If the player is able to shade in the last dotted line around a box, then that player gets the number of points in that box. For example, if one of the boxes with a 5 in it already has the top, bottom, and left side shaded, but not the right, and a player rolls a difference of 5, like a 61, then that player can shade in the right side of the box and get those 5 points. If a player rolls a difference for which there are no more dotted lines adjacent to the difference number, then the player will lose their turn. Once all the dotted lines have been shaded in, the player with the most points wins. And here's a better view of the instructions for Project 166. Project 167 is called Coin Dice. This game is pretty interesting to me. This is a single player game, so you can only play this game by yourself. And you're pretending you're playing against the house, and you're going to begin with 200 points. You will flip a coin, which you need for this game. I'm actually using a unique Coon coin. This is heads, and then this is tails. And then they will flip it and roll the dice by pressing C for a period of time and then releasing it. So I'm going to flip the coin now. I'm just going to see what it was. It's tails. So that would mean that house wins. And then you would roll the dice. And now that's a 6. I got 2 doubles. Now in this case, if the player got tails, they would lose 25 points. And that means, and that's the highest amount of points you can lose. If I got heads, then I would get the highest amount of points possible, which is 30. Since I had 200 points to begin with, and now I have 175 points left. I am going to flip again. I got a heads this time. Now I'm going to roll the dice. And now I got 62. Now, if the number is between 61 through 65, I get 20 points. And that means since I last had 175 points, I now have 195. Here's how many points you can win or lose based on your dice roll. If you get 12 through 16, you get 2 points, or you lose 7 points, depending on whether you get heads or tails. I'm going to just do this 1 or 2 more times. I got another head, so that means that I got 64. I got another 20 points. That means I'd have 215 points. One more time. Another heads. Now I wouldn't really flip the coin like that in a real game, but because I'm holding my phone, it's kind of tricky to do so. Now I would get 14 points, and that would give me 229. And that is how you play coin dice. This is going to be the final 6-sided dice game. This one is also incredibly interesting, but it's a little complicated for me. But if you read and listen to the instructions carefully, you might be able to figure out how to play it. This is baseball. Once you select game 5, you can either play this game by yourself or with 2 people. You could pretend to be either the home team or the visitor team, but in either case, you can just pretend that maybe one time you play, you're the home team, and the other time you play, you're the visitor team. You would have the visitor team roll the 6-sided dice and then release it. The first number, it will then be used in the lookup table below to determine whether the batter got a hit, which would be if the first number is 0, 1, or 2, or an out if the number is 3 or higher. But that's confusing because you can't get a 0 when rolling the dice. So maybe it'd be more fair. It could be 1 or just 1 or 2, and then 3, 4, 6. If the first number in the roll was a hit, then use the second number in the roll to look up the hit result in the table below. And runners only advance 1 base on a single and walk, and only advance 2 bases on a double unless indicated otherwise in the table. Here's what the result is. You can get either a single all the way up to a home run. If the first number in the roll was an out, then use the second number in the roll to look up the hit result in the table below. Now I think they're referring to the number in the ones digit, the second number. You could get anything in between a strikeout or an error, runner safe at first base, and all other runners advance. So I am going to quickly demonstrate. I'm going to roll the dice. I got a 1, so that means that I got a hit. If I got hit, then the number 2 would mean that I got a walk. Then I ignore this table because I got a hit and not an out. Now I'm going to do it again. Another hit. I'm going to try again out this time. Yep, now I got an out, and then because I got a 4, that would mean a deep fly out, runners on second base or third base advance. Now probably baseball fans out there would much better understand this game than I, because I don't really play baseball. But it looks interesting at the same time. And there you have baseball.